When you think of a comp plan and really what meritocracy means and earning based on what you're producing, you want to give somebody the ability and your highest performers in the company that they're never going to want to leave because they're doing really, really well. So you need to design a program that can both flex up when somebody's doing really well, but also does flex down in those slower times.
Chad Peterman here, and you are listening to Can't Stop the Growth, a platform for leaders and teams to grow and thrive. We highlight the importance of personal development, pursuing greatness, and always chasing your potential. Let's get into it. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Can't Stop the Growth. I'm your host, Chad Peterman, and today I have one of my good friends from the Midwest who runs an unbelievable company in the great state of Ohio. A company that I've really looked at and admired, and we share a ton of information across companies as far as best practices and what we should be focused on, all kinds of different things, and really excited to have him on the podcast as we work into the last quarter of the year and again start everyone's favorite season of budgeting season, which I know he'll have a lot of advice on. But without further ado, would like to welcome to the podcast Mike Barnhart, CFO at Eco. How's it going, Mike?
Going good. Thanks for having me, Chad.
Absolutely, Mike. Good to talk with you. Missed you last week at the super meeting. You just sent Aaron. Not that we didn't want to hang out with him, but it's always good to see you too. I guess for the listeners that may not know you, obviously you guys have definitely made a name for yourself in the space, and a ton of people kind of lean on you for best practices. But I guess it's maybe important to start from the beginning. Maybe give us a little bit of the backstory of how you got into the trades. I know you have a background outside of it, and then meeting Aaron and what you guys have been able to build over there.
I'm born and raised in Columbus, Ohio. I've been here for my whole life. My dad was an M&A attorney. That's actually come out to be helpful. He's given me a lot of good experience and guidance throughout the years. And my mom worked for a local bank here. I studied finance at Miami University in Ohio and got my MBA at Ohio State. And that's actually how I ended up meeting Aaron. Aaron and I met at a party. I had just finished going to grad school. So I was really used to going to school from 6 to 10 p.m. 2-3 nights a week. When I met Aaron, he said he wanted to learn more about finance. And I said, what do you have to learn more about finance for if you're running a plumbing company? He said, well, I want to grow the company. I said, where do you want to grow it to? He said, $100 million. And I said, all right, this guy's got some gold. And I thought it would be a fun project, just taking it like a case study. I think you've been to grad school. There's a lot of case studies where you're just looking at what's happening in a business and then making recommendations on what they should do. So that's really what we got doing together. I started to learn the business. I started to understand the levers of what you could pull. We weren't part of Nexstar or a best practices group at the time, so I really didn't know what a benchmark should be. So I did something that, it's a pretty fun exercise. I just reached out like I was a buyer of companies and started signing a bunch of NDAs, which were very easy to get back then, and started looking at people's profit and loss statements. From there, we just really built a relationship together, we'd start to meet on a quarterly basis and then even a monthly basis. We got to the point where we could review income statements, we could build budgets, and start to understand the numbers better together.
Absolutely. Now, I think it's important to flesh out the story a touch. So when he told you he wanted to go to 100 million, where was he at that time?
He's at one. I think that was back in like 2013, 2014. And then so I officially joined the company on January 1, 2015. Which was pretty cool too, because I don't know, you've probably had a few other jobs too. So my first week of being employed, Aaron took me to Tony Robbins' Business Mastery down at West Palm Beach, Florida. That was a great way to kick off our business relationship together. But as soon as I went to that, my wife came back and was like, man, you're like way more positive than you were before. It's been almost 9 years now that we've been doing it together, and really honored to be part of it.
Absolutely. Aaron and I were actually talking about that. Like the first time that I ever met you guys was when you hosted your peer group. 2019, I remember going over there with my brother and I was like, we got to get to know these guys because I feel like they're doing a lot of the stuff that we need to be doing and figuring things out. And I think we could really help each other. And I think that's where kind of our friendship and relationship kicked off. One of the questions I'd like to ask you, mainly because being the CFO, obviously have a handle on all things reporting and data and analytics and KPIs. And then Aaron, he has a little bit of that crossover. Like he definitely is ingrained in that piece of it, but also the visionary type thing. For listeners out there looking to really find that, to steal an EOS term, the visionary and integrator. How do you guys manage that relationship, and what's that look like for you guys running the company?
Where Aaron relies on me is probably handle certain parts of the business that allow him to spend the time where he needs to. Aaron's really good at marketing and he's really good at sales strategy. If I can be able to come into the business and tell him an accurate story of what's going on from a financial perspective, from a margin perspective, where we are versus where our budget was, where we are versus last year, to a certain extent, get him a catalog of reports that can help him understand that quickly too. It allows him to keep spending time in what he's really good at, where he's really passionate about too. I think with any CEO and CFO, there's a balance there. And if you look at the public sector, it's typically a CFO that ends up becoming a CEO because a lot of times at that big company level, the CEO level the CEO job is a financial position because it's all about how you're returning to shareholders. At our level, it's very much an operational position. I know you're a big fan of Vivid Vision. We've both read that book. Being able to paint that vision is really what's most important about a CEO doing every day.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that. I think that that's critical. And one of the things I've learned, because I feel like as you scale the company, there was a time that Aaron could probably do everything himself. And when you're small and scrappy and you just make it work, and then as you scale, understanding what you're good at, what your lane is, and then finding people who complement you and are good at other things and can really drive it forward. Obviously, you guys have scaled an incredible amount since you met the $1 million man back in 2014. What is something, if you look back at kind of the growth journey and say, hey, I really wish we would have focused on this sooner?
Things I think we've done really well is create a lot of information available to people, whether that's PACE reports, call boards, huddle reports, KPI reports, tech scorecards, like all of that has basically been automated within our business. So everybody gets that data really quickly. Where I think that some of the things that I wish we would have done better earlier and sooner is, align on compensation plan. We had to unwind them at some point in time because we realized we had over 200 individual comp plans. That's not really going to be scalable if we want to keep going to $100 million and beyond. ServiceTitan has some great options with configurable payroll for the field side. There is a lot of stuff that's coming out with tie-ins briefly with their Fleet Pro program. Innova is a great payroll system that we've been using lately that has helped tie that in. And ServiceTitan's getting involved with Innova too. They were just at Pantheon. And aligning on some of those comp plans early on and making sure they're very clear. So every field compensation plan in our business has both a slide deck and a contract associated with it. And so that if there ever is a question, you can always refer to either one of those and say, this is what it should be.
I've done my fair share of screw ups on comp plans, and you think you're being really cute, and all of a sudden, you get 3 months down the road and you ask the technician if he knows how he's paid, and he's like, I don't have any clue what's going on here. What would you say from your experience, making sure that the comp plan is obviously fair and equitable to the technician, to the customer, to the company? What would you say are some of the other key components of a comp plan? And you could use kind of yours as an example, or just things that you found that worked versus things that now that they don't really care, or like that just didn't seem to land as far as understanding and making it easy for them to do really well and know how they're going to be compensated.
When you think of a comp plan and really what meritocracy means and earning based on what you're producing, you want to give somebody the ability and your highest performers in the company that they're never going to want to leave because they're doing really, really well. So you need to design a program that can both flex up when somebody's doing really well, but also does flex down in those slower times. I have had some challenging times, and I'm guessing that their direct labor percentage is a little bit higher than where they want it to be this year. How you do that is you have a really good upfront comp plan, and then you tie it to bigger performing metrics, whether that's like you can get something on the monthly basis for doing X. The other way is just driving the really important things, whether that's the tech generated lead turnover or whether that's a creation of a membership. There's no reason like why you shouldn't heavily incentivize a membership when you realize how important they are to the business. We've been starting to grow those really quickly. Just had our biggest week ever in memberships last week. I know you have over 20,000. We're pretty new to the HVAC world. We're trending towards 7,000 this year. And
yeah, absolutely. I think that that's some really great points is just to understand your high performer should never say, hey, I'm not getting paid enough money. There should be a plan there that continually compound so that they can continue. The more that they perform, the more that they bring in, the more that they make.
Before we cleaned up our comp plan, well, the way we designed it is that we were almost accounting for the lower performers in our comp plan and not really giving the higher performers really what they should earn. Since then, we fixed that. And when you do that, you'll see that your retention rates really increase a lot because you're not losing anybody that you really don't coach out.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I think the biggest thing that so many people get scared of is they draft this comp plan and then they see the high performers and what they're like bringing home. And they get scared of it. They're like, oh my God, I just paid that guy however much money this week. I didn't even bring home that much. That's not the point because they sold the work for the company. Well, you may not have taken it home in your paycheck. If you own the company or a manager and incentivized on a bonus plan, like the better they do, the better you do. And I think people get scared of that from what I've seen. Like, oh, I can't pay him that much. It's like, well, if you align it correctly, everyone should win.
The larger you get, you start, rather than looking at a dollar amount, you look at the percentages and the benchmarks there, and that's how you analyze, an income statement. And as long as you're designing things that can still stay within those benchmark percentages, it shouldn't really matter if somebody's making $500,000 a year. You're just designing things that work within a benchmark program.
Great point. You mentioned in there the importance of memberships and you mentioned getting HVAC up off the ground. Those people that are thinking about adding a trade, if I'm correct, I think you added HVAC and electrical in short order. What are some of the things that you learned from adding a trade? What are some of the things that you wish you would have thought about?
I would say don't do it until you really feel like you've earned the right to do it in your community and that you're doing what you do well and really well, because it's going to take a lot more time and dedication than what you think. For us, we were like, oh, well, we're plumbing. Plumbing, we have to touch so many different parts of the house. So it's the sump pumps, the water heaters, the garbage disposals, the sink. HVAC, we're just selling boxes. This is going to be easy. Turns out it is not so easy, and it is so heavily membership driven. It's much more seasonal, and I know we haven't had the best weather in the Midwest this year. That's been a learning experience as well. And then there's tons of tools and tips and training that needs to come with that has all been a learning experience. Be ready to take a margin hit for a while. Also probably a marketing hit on getting your customers to know that you actually do that trade. But in the long run, I think it's been a positive experience. Definitely a ton of mess ups along the way. Like I have a very keen memory. I was looking over the P&L and I thought that our payroll percentage in HVAC was, I thought that we had messed up the accrual because it was so out of whack. Our recruiting team kept sending HR candidates to the director of HVAC and he liked the people, so he kept hiring. He wasn't looking at the budgeted numbers of technicians that we were supposed to have. And so he hired like 14 people. And I was like, oh, wow, you did all that in a month, huh? That was not the budgeted number of technicians we were supposed to have. We absorbed it and made it work with growth, but it was definitely not in the plan. That's actually another challenge as you continue to scale too, that it really has to be addressed in the budgeting cycle and then reinforced throughout the year is when is the right time to make a hire and how does that review process work based on where current call volumes are, especially in these times. You got to be super cognizant of that because that revenue per individual metric, I've got a $50 million business and I've got 250 people. I'm right at $200,000 per person that, exists within the business. That's a good metric to keep as you continue to keep growing. Most people put that benchmark right around that $220,000 to $250,000 mark, depending on your mix of business. Plumbing and electric might be lower, HVAC might be higher, but it's a good one to just track over a period of time and see where you've been at.
Mike, real quick, if people are wanting to track that, how do you typically calculate revenue by employee? Do you do it like at the end of the month? How do you calculate that?
Each month you're putting in what your revenues were, and then you're putting in what your average headcount was for that month. You're dividing. The numerator would be the revenue, the denominator would be the total number of people, and then whatever that bits out, you multiply it by 12 so you can see what it would look like on an annualized basis. And you do that January through December. I actually have a good template. If anybody wants to get it, I can just email it to them. Then at the end of the year, it's just an average of what that count is each month, and it gives you out the right number. I'm part of a Nexstar PBOG group that we talk every week, and we range between $200,000 to $280,000 within that group. But that's a good benchmark to have.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. One of the exercises we're going through is, when you see such explosive growth, it's really easy to throw people at problems and not focus on process improvement or use of technology and different things like that. And it's not that, you need to go out and fire half your people. It's just looking into the future. Hey, we've got these people, we've already trained them, they're a great culture fit, they're a great part of the team. But how do we build for the future? How do we build around them so that we can double in size without adding any additional people and watching that revenue per employee go up? You're going to have to add people over time. How do you guys view the budgeting of positions you're going to need into the future and what people maybe should be thinking about as you're scaling and what you need and different things like that?
I think the first part about that is that everybody kind of needs to have a number that they're shooting to. So you're understanding what production looks like at an average level and kind of a maximum level. I mean, one of the things that has happened this year throughout the year in our call center that a lot of shout out to our call center manager, Xander Fisher. He's done a lot of training. I know he's been to your call center and he's looked at best practices across the country trying to improve this. And his team of CSRs right now have gone to booking over 400 leads per month on average. And he set that as a new threshold of like, that's basically where performance is. Similarly, I know that attrition will happen with anybody's business as people have left. He's not needed to really hire anybody new. We now have 12 CSRs that can book 4,800 leads a month. And that's the average performance across that. So, understanding where those benchmarks are and where you want them to be and what you have to do to get there can really help control that as you continue to grow. Because now when we're playing for call center representatives, we're budgeting how many leads we think we're going to get throughout the year. It becomes a metric. Like we're now at this level, so we're going to need 2 more CSRs. But you kind of understand what that benchmark is. As you continue to grow as a company, you know when you're going to need to bring somebody else on, and then you're following that.
That makes perfect sense. One of the things I've learned over the years, because I am a self admitted terrible budgeter, what would be those tips for people that are maybe just starting out, just jumping into the budgeting stuff? I know there's a lot to budgeting, but what are a couple of those things you think people should be thinking about?
First thing you need is a good budgeting template. And what I mean by that is don't budget at a high level. Budget at a department level, budget at a location level, and then have a template that can roll all those up. So if you want to look at it at a bigger level, you can. If you don't have a template like that, or you don't know how to build a template like that, tell people to shoot me an email. I have a blank one that I can send out that I built. It's very easy to use and very intuitive because it's important to do it at that lower level because that's what drives the right conversations of, am I going to have the lead count to fulfill this? And if so, what are the benchmarks that I'm going to have? And that's starting all the way back to the revenue equation of how many technicians are going to exist, what is that conversion rate, how many sold jobs times what is that average sale equals my revenue. And then there's a lot of other benchmarks you can put in there too, like what is my material percentage going to be, what is my direct labor percentage going to be, how much am I going to have in damages, equipment rentals, or any of that other stuff. So you can get to a margin pretty quickly, and each department really only takes about 20 minutes to align on and say, like, I think we can do this. And then you just keep doing that until you have like a budget that you feel pretty good about. I will say that when you are doing that, sometimes you do have to set a budget that is realistic. If you set a budget that is 40% growth over LY, that might be actually what you can do, but it'll feel a lot better within your business to set one that's 20% over LY and then go crush it. That's something I actually learned from a long time ago. I visited Any Hour, and their budgeting process was pretty simple. It was like, oh, we just budget 10% over LY and then we kill it every year. And they get to celebrate all the time. That's a very easy way to do it. I like having the granularity because it'll tell you when to hire people, what your staffing should be, give you your key benchmarks. If you're not hitting, let's say, a 70% conversion, you know that's why you're not hitting budget. When you also have that, I think when you get up to a leadership level, if you have a general manager and you have trade line managers that are over these areas, they can come and tell you, here is how I'm performing against these pretty granular level benchmarks. And if they're not in line, they can tell you about the trainings and the strategies that they're using to try to get them in line. And if they're over that benchmark, then you get to celebrate with them. You get to go tell all their team what a great job they're doing, and you get to, hype them all up. I think when you're talking about budgeting, get granular. The way we do our budgeting today is a series of offsites to try to keep them to no longer than like 4 hours at a time, but it's generally about 6 offsites. And you're going through different areas of the business. So, one might be explaining the revenue build and the margin build. Another one might be a SWOT on what's happening within the business today to try to identify what your key initiatives are going to be for next year. You want to have 6 to 7 key initiatives that you're going to be working on throughout the year. Another one that we always do is like a future day where we're looking at what are our growth plans, whether that's through acquisition or greenfielding. What are some of like those moonshot ideas that you don't know, just throwing out like the wild ideas to think out of the box more, looking at your membership strategies, looking at your sales strategies within the business. Because I think that, probably something that you experienced as like PE has come into our markets and as there's been consolidation and there's a lot of growth, it's harder and harder to differentiate your service from another company next to you. And we have to be thinking in that future state of what else could we do? Like, I love some of the stuff that proprietary technology that you guys have built. I've just visited your guys' warehouse and saw what you guys are doing from inventory practice, and it was world class. You guys are doing great things, and so are we. And you have to think about how you're differentiating yourself from your competition there too.
Yeah, I think that's some great points around budgeting and different stuff. If I had to summarize, it's don't be afraid of it. There's a lot of great resources out there. I don't know if you guys ever did the BPW kind of planning workshop. I know when we were smaller, we did that, which allowed us to dip our toe in the water. And it was kind of a guided exercise for budgeting. I think the one thing that I would say to listeners who are maybe afraid of it is I was in your shoes. I was afraid of it. I didn't know how to do it. That is ultimately going to be the blueprint for what you're going to be able to do next year. And having a blueprint, you wouldn't build a house without a blueprint. So you're going to need that. I think the other important piece that you alluded to, I'd like you to talk a little bit more about it, because the first time I ever saw data and numbers and KPIs displayed openly was at your guys' place at that peer group, which was so impressive. And I can only imagine you guys have, expounded upon that and iterated and different things of that nature. One of the things I see people struggle with is sharing the numbers with their management team. They're afraid, oh my God, they're going to know. Have you guys ever gone through that? If so, or if not, regardless, what would you recommend to people who are maybe a little bit skittish of showing the numbers to their people?
With showing numbers, there's a way to do it, because if you show people too many numbers, it gets just too confusing. What you do want to have everyone on your team know is whether you're winning or whether you're losing. And there should be no question of whether that's happening. The fewer metrics you give somebody, like if you're a plumbing service technician, conversion is probably your metric. It's probably how good am I retaining customers that I get the opportunity to serve. But they need to be able to see that. And they need to be able to see that on a daily basis, monthly basis. They need to be able to see it over a period of time as well to know whether they're getting better or worse. I remember when I first started, I'm decent at Excel, but our CTO, Elliot, is light years beyond where I am in data. But I was building tech scorecards and I was producing them monthly. And I remember, once I got to having like 12 months of data in there, and people would be able to see what their 12-month performance looked like. And it has, a couple of charts and graphs that show whether they're getting better or worse. It was very powerful for them to be able to not only see that for themselves, but also see it benchmarked against where they were with the rest of their team. It creates more of like a gamification of numbers that people can celebrate or coach.
Yeah, I think that that's extremely powerful. And I think it's one of these things where, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's been a massive emphasis over the last maybe 4 years on training. Training, 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 training. Everybody's about training. I think what a lot of people forget is exactly what you just said is you can train all you want. You can train till the cows come home. But if your technicians don't know where they stand on a daily, monthly, annually, whatever it may be, if they don't know if they're getting better, why would they even embrace any of the training that you're doing? And so I think it's really coupled together of everybody wants to know if they're getting better. You don't go to football practice only to play a game without a scoreboard. No one likes practice, but people like playing in the game. And you go to practice so you can win in the game. I think that that's a huge piece of it, which you guys do really well. What would be some tips as far as like creating a scorecard? You mentioned conversion rate. What other statistics or KPIs would you or do you track for technicians that people can probably easily get out of their software?
If you're looking at what those benchmarks are, because you're also setting them in your budget, is what are the number of ops that you're running? What are the conversion rate? Where's your average sale? Some of the more tricky ones that we track on our scorecard is how many memberships are you selling? What is your sold hour efficiency, which is a metric of everything in our price book has a task time divided by how many hours you work. So it's showing how efficient you are with your time. Recall rates are an important one as well. So you're being able to tell quality. Reviews are a big one. Most all this information is available from a data drop or a scheduled report that you can create. You really want to get tricky. You can get this out of service thing, like on an average estimate, how many options are they giving to a customer? You can see the person that's only giving one option every time, and you can see the person that's giving three or four. And that usually is a pretty powerful indicator for coaching too.
Absolutely. You said it best is, start small and let them wrap their arms around, okay, what is this data? What am I seeing? What's winning? How do I improve it? So on and so forth. And then you can add things as you go on. You guys, I'm going to guess, probably didn't start out with all of those metrics. But as you've progressed and guys really get it, well, then you can start to add more things and track more things, reviews and memberships, and all of these things that are really an indicator of the level of service that you are providing to the homeowner. And I think that's the biggest thing to stress to your team is that not all about the numbers, but the numbers indicate how good a service you're providing. If you don't get any reviews and you can't sell a membership and you have no revenue for your day's worth of work, how good a service did you provide? It probably wasn't great. And so that's what we need to work on.
And I would say 90% of the message out to technicians is not about the numbers. The real message is just what are we doing to help out our customers every day? And how are we showing that we care more than everybody else? That's really what we need to be talking about. And then the numbers can help tweak some of those things to understand what that performance looks like.
Couldn't agree more. The numbers will indicate where you can get better. One thing I did want to talk about, because you brought this up in our pre-call, you've got your coveted CFO commandments. Tell the listeners about these bad boys.
Well, I feel like I talked to a lot of business owners and other CFOs, and eventually I just started kind of writing down what are my tenets that I think that we need to live by in our finance team and at the CFO level. For me, one of the most important ones there is that we need to close our books in an accurate and timely manner. We use Sage Intacct as our accounting system, but whatever you use, how fast can you close those? Because I've heard a lot of people close at day 8 and day 10. We close every month at day 4. In order to do that, there's a whole checklist of items that need to happen behind it. I think your team does this pretty well too, but the reconciling accounts on a daily basis, weekly basis, they're doing everything at a daily and weekly cadence. So when you get actually to closing the month, it is basically by the end of the day, the last day of the month, you have about a 99% view of what's actually happening there. Like there is no real surprises there. And then you just need a couple of days to just clear everything up before you push out reporting to everybody. And better reporting package that you have, not everybody's going to sift through 40 pages of data. But if you can get that out pretty quickly, people can look at things that are important to them. The other one's just staying curious. And one of the things I like least about the business is, as it's scaled, I don't always get to know everything that's going on. And I don't get to know who everyone is anymore. And that was really hard. I still feel like, I'm just going around introducing myself all the time. But when that happens, you're losing touch with stuff. So the only way that you can get back in touch with stuff is staying really curious, going around, asking questions, digging in. It's your job. You got to understand how it works if you want to make an impact on it. You got to stay curious with it. One of them I mentioned, everybody needs to have a number. They need to have that individual number that they're focused on.
I appreciate you sharing some of the more impactful ones. I think that the most important thing, at least that I took away, is if you're going to run a successful business, everyone has to be aligned and every department has to know their marching orders. They've got to know what success looks like, what we need to be focused on, and where we're going to take the organization, and really down to the point of like why my role is important. To your point, if you don't close the books in a timely fashion, you could, while you may be just an accountant, you could be potentially impacting a lot of people. Every role in the business is important and everybody needs to know what they're driving to. So I really appreciate you sharing those. I guess as we wrap up here, we're looking at a year that, after talking to a number of people, hasn't been the greatest in the industry here over the last 9, 10 months. What do you guys see as the outlook coming out of a year that we haven't seen in a long time? It's been tough. We've really had to work at it. What do you guys focus on as you set the stage for next year and where your focus is going to be moving into 2024?
We're just kicking off our budgeting process, but that's why I think a budgeting process should be more than just revenue and margin build. It should be what are those key initiatives going to be. It's doubling down on the things that are really important to keep a business healthy. It's going to be how are we going to drive more memberships? What are we going to be doing to differentiate ourselves? And a lot of times you see that through taking away barriers from the customer. And that could be investing within technology to say, I'm going to make it so easy to schedule a call with us that like all I have to do is send this quick text message out to a customer and they have to click 4 things and they're booked. We do not need to get 25 pieces of information to book a call with somebody. Training is important. We should know what we're doing there, and really just getting back to focus on what drives performance across and alignment across the organization. So there's tons of wild things happening right now in terms of, people are looking at outsourced accounting departments. You've got interest rates that are playing big parts in different areas of the business, especially in consumer financing. You've got insurance carriers that are really getting pretty strict on what they're willing to offer people, and especially in the home service industry, they're tightening up there. So you just have to understand where you're going to grow, what are the areas that are the easiest to grow in, double down on those areas. For us, like we did just start electric this year, but for us, we found that the markets that we're in, electric is very underserved. Why not double down into that and see where we can grow there? Obviously, it's not the same scalability as HVAC or plumbing, but it is a great trade, and it is something that we've really enjoyed getting into in the past year. So we're going to double down on that. And then where can you expand? Where is there an underserved market? Where is there an acquisition opportunity to make you stronger? We just made an HVAC acquisition this year that's turned out really well to integrate in. They've taught us as much as we've taught them, since that's a newer trade for us, continuing to grow in different ways.
Absolutely. I think that is great advice to kind of leave the listeners here as we wrap this up is find the areas while overall we could be looking at our businesses and saying, oh my gosh, doom and gloom, this, that, and the other. It's like find the areas where you can excel. Find the areas where there's the least resistance. If the weather didn't cooperate, can you move some marketing spend over into plumbing? I would agree with you. Electrical, I think, is underserved across the entire country. It's frankly amazing. We've had a lot of success in launching ours. And is that an area? Generators. There's all kinds of different avenues that you can continue to grow the business. I think as we think about this episode and we think about how it relates to growth and getting better, I think Mike has really laid out a number of different things that we may not always focus on. We may not always place an importance on making sure that our technicians have numbers to look at, making sure that we budget correctly. All of these things add up. As it's often said, it's all about the little things, all about the things that you can be doing to continue to improve the business, continue to improve your employee satisfaction, your customer satisfaction, and continue to move things forward. Mike, I can't thank you enough. It was great catching up. I've got some notes written down here that I'm going to be checking on, especially if we're booking 400 calls per month per CSR. Before we leave, is there anything as far as contact? I know you mentioned spreadsheets or templates, how people can get a hold of you.
I'll give you my email. It's just Mike, M-I-K-E, at geteco.com, Geteco.com.
Appreciate that. Again, listeners, as always, appreciate you tuning in. If you have a minute, definitely leave us a review so that we can get out there in front of more people and conversations like this can be had so that we can all lift each other up and grow better businesses. As always, don't stop growing out there. Do something for somebody. Reach out, lend a hand, and help them just like Mike has helped us today. Thanks for tuning in. If you'd like to get connected, you can find me at chadmpeterman.com. To see what our team's up to, you can visit petermanbros.com. As always, keep growing out there.